A couple of weeks ago, I put out a video questioning the intentions of the forthcoming London Mural Festival. Off the back of it, the organisation have issued a response, and whilst I think that this is a step in the right direction, I believe there's still lots of unanswered questions about their intentions and the model. So, like all good sequels, this probably won't be as good as the first one, but hey, there's nothing else on, so why not give it a watch? My name's Doug, you're watching FWTV. Kinda goes without saying, but if you haven't seen the original video, it's probably worth watching that before you watch this one to make sure you're up to speed. For the purposes of today, I'm going to be dissecting the main topics of contention around the festival with the aim of furthering the understanding of their model. According to the response, the London Mural Festival will not be using public funds to cover any of the murals. This does still leave open a question of whether or not public funds will be used to cover any other aspects of the production. The organisers state that the festival is a combination of being self-funded and backed by sponsors. Let's take a minute to try and understand what that means and how it could potentially shape the direction of the project. The term self-funded in this case is quite opaque, and I can only speculate as to what that actually means. Global Street Art are backed by a multinational private equity firm, which may account for their recent exponential growth. Two sponsors in particular stood out on their page: the property developers LCR, who have recently overseen the massive regeneration projects in Stratford and King's Cross, whilst Lendlease were behind the redevelopment of the well-known Heygate estate. I fully acknowledge the effort it takes to get projects up and running, especially during a time like this, but I do still think there's questions to be asked about the level of involvement and the level of interest that a property developer has in this model. Interestingly enough, Global Street Art seem to have some very close ties with property developers in London. Their building site programme facilitates artists to paint on the sides of construction site hoardings. As part of the programme, they promise to fix any tags that appears on the sides of the hoarding. This is a really telling example of how they seem to view graffiti. Whilst I fully acknowledge the benefits of having more art in the city, I would argue that this programme shuts down the authentic dialogue that graffiti creates in the street. Artists that aren't willing to participate in this model are being silenced to appease a client. In doing so, they're creating a filter for graffiti to exist while simultaneously giving the luxury flats being developed the appearance of being supported. This is a practice more commonly referred to as art washing. At its weakest, it just displays a total lack of understanding of centuries of graffiti culture. At its worst, it's enabling a form of oppression by silencing the authentic and autonomous voices of a local community. I reached out to one of the youth groups involved, and they told me that this was just going to be a good opportunity to get rid of some of the graffiti they have on their building. With absolutely no sense of irony, in order to do this, they've enlisted the German graffiti group 1UP. In my first video, I asked whether or not the artwork would benefit or reflect the community. It feels a little short-sighted to bring in graffiti artists from Germany to paint over graffiti artists from London. I have no doubt that the 1UP guys are going to absolutely kill this, but it does feel like there's a missed opportunity here to reach out and empower some local voices. I wonder if they're going to bring their fire extinguisher. Diversity was one of the big topics in my original video, and I'd like to bring this up again. I questioned whether or not the artwork would benefit or reflect the community. I wasn't calling for proportional representation or demanding that they hit quotas, but just simply asking some fundamental questions about whether or not this was integral to their vision, as I believe that these are questions that most of us in all sectors are asking right now. How can we be better? In their response, they stated that the UK's street art and graffiti artists are predominantly white and male, and that they would largely be taking from this pool. Well, if that is the case, then what else could be done to make sure that they're engaging with this dialogue? They seem to be bringing in artists from all over the world, so it looks like there's more than enough breathing room for this to be factored in. The main point of this wasn't to ask festivals or organisations to just tick boxes, but it was to see if they could go beyond the bubble they see on Instagram and find a way to weave identity into the very fabric of their project, because with that will come ownership and pride. There's a whole series of other elements from the response I'd happily pick up on: the vagueness around paying artists, the way they quietly slipped the call out for volunteers off their homepage, but there's one line I just can't seem to escape, and that is the idea of living in painted cities. For almost a decade, agencies like Global Street Art have siphoned off wall space in the city. So when they say they want to live in painted cities, what they really mean is they want to live in cities painted through their filter. One of the most common responses I got from participating artists was that it was just so rare for them to be offered a wall in London and that they couldn't say no to that. And therein lies an irony. Access to wall space is being drip-fed to artists by the very people choking it all off. It feels like this is some Hannibal Lecter levels of toxicity. Look, I was grateful for the response from them. We now have it in writing that none of these walls or their surrounding areas will be targets for their advertising program, and the second I see anything counter to that, I promise you will be the first to know. As Global Street Art rightly pointed out, they are not the only company operating in the area through adverts, but they are by far the largest, and the second we stop holding them to account is when they get given a free pass. I found it really surprising that they brushed off my suggestion that they should acknowledge the responsibility they have in the city because they simply paint murals. In 2 weeks' time, when every single estate agent in the region is latching onto this artwork to rebrand neighbourhoods, you will see that there is no such thing as simply painting murals. Whether they admit it or not, they have a moral obligation to consider the impact they have on a city, and I do not yet feel convinced that they're taking this seriously. I'd like to put out one more video in this short series covering festivals and projects I believe to be effectively considering their place in culture and the wider world. Till then, take care of yourselves. I'll be back with you real soon. My name's Doug. This was Fifth Wall TV.